I'm streaming this just so we have it recorded. Make sure I get myself in.
Can you see yourself?
Now, would someone be able to rotate the camera a little bit so it's facing? Yeah, that's good.
That's good.
Yep. Great. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this warm summer evening. Very happy to be here. We're doing our LifeSci NYC Internship Program Career Panel, and we've got three amazing panelists. So we're going to start out with everyone just introducing yourself and giving your names. Natasha, I don't know if I've ever pronounced your last name, let alone pronounced it properly.
I can teach you. You know Barbara Streisand?
Yes.
Same.
Streisand, okay.
Yeah, you just swallow a couple of letters.
And I actually studied Russian too, but I haven't seen it in Cyrillic.
Yeah, so it's Streisand, but it's kind of hard to say Streisand.
Streisand. Car show.
Yeah.
I'm also, your email says Natasha Grit Bio, so I always think of that as your last name.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sabria Stukes and Ashish Agarwal from Salvia. And
I'm not sure where to be looking at this camera or
it's all good. And the three of you have been tremendous partners of the program for years, both as hosts and in Sabria's case as everything. But we'll get to that, how the various roles you've played. So Natasha, first, do you want to start and introduce yourself and just talk about, in broad terms, your career, where you are and how you got there?
Sure. How long do I have?
You know, that in saying that, I recognize that would take hours.
No.
For each of you, but just a quick intro would be great.
So I finished PhD in collaboration between Tel Aviv University in Israel and Mount Sinai, and then I did a postdoc first at CUNY and then Mount Sinai. During my postdoc, I studied cancer research. So when I finished postdoc, I started my own company. Along the way, I learned how to run a company first and how to produce a company and stuff like that. But of course, I needed income, so I worked in parallel on multiple, in two places actually. This is my second job that I'm doing right now. First job that I did was in Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. I was a research projects manager. And we managed funding of other people. And now I work in a pharmaceutical company, which is called Bristol Myers Squibb, in New Jersey. And I still run my own company, and I was a co-founder of two other companies with a group of.
And what do you do in your spare time?
Okay. So I volunteer a little bit. I organize events for Israeli scientists that work outside of Israel, so in the United States mostly. We do virtual events. I volunteer in school. I do a little bit of martial arts when I have time. That's it.
I personally feel very inadequate. I'm sure everyone else does as well. She's really a super person.
And I have two kids.
Yes.
Yeah. Not all of them.
Sabria?
So hello, my name is Sabria, and I'll tell my journey in reverse because I feel like it makes more sense that way. So I currently hold the position as the Chief Scientific Officer for IndieBio New York, which is a relatively new-ish player in the New York City biotech ecosystem. IndieBio has been around for a number of years. They initially started in San Francisco, but we are a startup development program helping biotech companies, specifically founders and teams who are using biology to solve some of the most pressing problems in human and planetary health. Recently, this is a very new opportunity for me. I just joined earlier this year in March. But before that, I had a small stint as the operations director for a biotech company based out of J Labs, which is just a 10-minute walk from here, called Stellate Therapeutics. They were developing, or they are, I should say, developing therapeutics for neurological disorders using metabolites that are produced from the gut microbiome. And so in that role, I was kind of doing everything from helping set up their lab, making sure the bills got paid, onboarding new employees, kind of really creating a lot of the standard operating procedures that one might need when starting a biotech company. So really learned a lot of the kind of administrative and like technical ins and outs of what it means to build a biotech company. Before that, though, I was actually solidly, I guess you would say, higher education administration. So for about 5.5 years, I worked at City College, helping them build a brand new master's program in translational medicine, which the core tenet or mission of it, I should say, was to train scientists and engineers in the process of medical device commercialization. And so that was a collaboration between the School of Engineering and the School of Medicine. Really, like I said, giving scientists and engineers or anyone really with a STEM background the training and the understanding of like, okay, we know you know the science, but you are interested in bringing the technology into the world, and there's so many other things that go into that. Who's your customer? What is your business model? Are you actually solving a real problem? And so this was an actual degree, a formalized education program to teach scientists and engineers how to do that. So it was the first program, master's program of its kind in New York City. It had a similar one at UCSF, UC Berkeley. So that was a really interesting opportunity to think about how we train graduate students or how we get them to think about problems in the world around them. Before that, I graduated from, I got my PhD at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in biomedical sciences. I worked in the microbiology and immunology lab, so I often say my first real lab was like infectious diseases. And then before I went to grad school, I worked at the NYU School of Medicine doing tuberculosis research. And then before that, I worked at the National Institute of Health doing HIV research. I had many odd jobs in between, which I'm happy to share more about that when we kind of discuss making decisions about careers.
Ashish?
Great. So I'm Ashish. I'm the CEO of Solvview, which is a bioinformatics company. My background, I usually describe it as being 50-50 in the natural sciences and computer science. So as an undergrad, I majored in chemical engineering at Berkeley. But even then, I was very interested in computer science. I was always taking computer science classes, even though I wasn't getting credit for them towards my degree. But it was just too interesting to me. I just kept doing it. And then I did work for a couple of years in Silicon Valley, but I realized I really wanted to go to grad school. So during Carnegie Mellon for my PhD, where again I was officially in the chemical engineering department, but my dissertation and research had absolutely nothing to do with chemical engineering. It was entirely theoretical computer science. My main advisor was a theoretical computer scientist. And by the end, I was essentially a theoretical computer scientist, which was wonderful intellectually. It was very fun and interesting, but I was missing science. So for my postdoc, I decided to get into bioinformatics. That was, it seemed more interesting than chemistry to me at that time. Genomics was really booming, and it was clear that biology was just going to have a big impact on society. So I made the decision to get into bioinformatics. That was at Yale. Then I moved to NYU, which was my last job before starting Solvview. And at NYU, I built the genomics core and kind of served as an internal consultant to the department. I worked on a variety of projects for different labs. And that was a lot of fun. And then started Solvview a few years ago. We can talk more about that in subsequent questions, I guess. Yeah.
That's great. And just a few ground rules. One is I encourage interactivity, both among the panelists and with everyone else in the room. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or yell out if no one's looking towards you. And the same, if you have questions for each other, I think that makes for a more interesting dialogue. First question is just the value of a PhD. And how essential do you see a PhD as being to get into a career in the life sciences?
I think it really depends on what you want to do, and also the knowledge and training you want to gain. I think for me, I took some time after I graduated college. So I went to Virginia Tech. So I'm originally from Arlington, Virginia. So I went to Virginia Tech for college. And I very specifically remember the day I graduated thinking, I have no interest in school anymore. I am going to get a job. I'm going to like make money. And I mean, I got a job. I'm not sure if I was making a lot of money, but I did research. Like I said, I worked at I got a fellowship at the National Institute of Health. I came to New York. I was working as a research assistant at NYU. And, grad school really wasn't on my radar for a number of reasons. But I think what started happening was when I started thinking about the kind of work I was seeing other people do, especially in the labs that I was working in, like they got to determine what experiments, were going to be run. They got to analyze the data. They got to present the results. They got to work with other scientists. And that's not to say that I couldn't as a research assistant. I was absolutely doing some of that. I was absolutely getting my name on papers, but I could see the divide between the kind of training they were getting while they were in grad school versus me coming in at 9 and clocking out at 5. And so, I made the decision to go to grad school. And I think it is a very personal decision because I also think it depends on where you are in your life. And so, I know for a fact the jobs that I had subsequently, I absolutely needed a PhD for. But I also really want to be clear and say that when I was in grad school, I had no vision really for the kinds of jobs I was going to have. I just knew that I was really interested in getting formal training in the life sciences in this way.
But I agree with what you just said, that when you look at other scientists doing PhD research, they have their own project, they're going into this. So I think that's why I wanted to do a PhD. I wanted my own project. I wanted to lead a project, but it's definitely not for everybody. I think that for career development, it takes so much time to finish a PhD. So unless you like it, unless this is something you like to do, I wouldn't say that you can build a career. Mm-hmm. Whether you'll be more competitive if you have a PhD, yes. But it's 5 years of your life, right?
I will also say I was 29. I was one of the oldest people in my cohort when I started going to grad school. And so I think that's the other thing. Don't feel like you have to go to grad school right away just because you think it's like this kind of next logical step right after college.
And do you think you got more out of it by going back later?
I think I just had a different sense of how the world worked, in terms of the fact that I had to like pay my own rent, or not, I had to pay my own rent when I was a grad student, but it's like very different when it's not subsidized rent, through your school, let's say, And so I do think I had a bit more clarity and focus about why I was going to grad school, but I think that clarity really kind of stopped in terms of what you were saying. Like I wanted to go because I really deeply wanted to learn a different way of thinking about science. And I also understand that, if you are a research assistant, that it's, I want to be really clear. It's not that you can't have that same kind of training. It just does look a little different. Especially because, like I said, you can like clock out at 5, or
it's
grad school is very
quality.
different.
It's a different quality of life, right?
Yeah. I kind of agree. There's such a diversity of careers. I think we often just follow these sort of stereotypical views and take things in too cliched of a manner. It's like, but there's such a diversity of careers that are possible. You should not, PhD is not required. Most people don't have one. But so many people have wonderful jobs, right? So I think it's about personal interest. That's how I've always pursued my career choices. It's never really been so forward-looking. I don't try to think like, where will this get me in 10 years? I've always just said, what do I feel like doing? What's fun?
Yeah.
So I picked my PhD because I really wanted it. It sounded fun to me. Like I wanted to do deep technical work. If it doesn't sound fun to you, don't do it. Go get a job, and you'll do really wonderful, advancing yourself through the company in other ways. So,
and I think another way to think about that too, which is often how I do think about these kind of like next steps in my career, but it's also like, how do I want to be spending my time? Because as you said, a PhD is 5 years, and I remember, minimum. And I remember I was talking, I was getting all this advice about should I do this or should I not? And I remember my dad was saying, well, where do you want to be in 5 years anyway? Right? So like, if in 5 years you want to have your PhD and and that you want to spend that time working in a lab in this way, like then go for it. But if you just want to like kind of get a job and like, continue working in this way, like that's also fine too. Like, right, like the time is going to pass one way or the other. So it's really just up to you about how you want to be spending that time.
So for Ashish and Natasha, you both started companies. And two questions. One is, at what point did you first think, I want to start a company? And what was part of the thought process? And what are the feelings of just having both the independence, but also the responsibilities and pressures of starting a company? And just from my perspective, starting a company, I never really processed the idea that you no longer have direct deposit where every 2 weeks someone's putting money into your bank account. And I didn't really think that through until like you start your own company and there's just no money showing up in your account. So with all those questions, like share some thoughts about starting a company.
You can start.
Can I ask a question before
Yes,
the previous
please.
one? So for Saria, you said for your the jobs you got after you finished your PhD, you needed the PhD. When you say that, do you mean you needed the experience you got from the PhD or the title of the PhD?
I think initially, I would say that it was the latter. But once I got the job, I realized it also was the former. Meaning, when I got the job, so in between when I graduated and when I started City College, I also had like a number of different very odd jobs, all within science. I actually worked at BioBox for a little bit. I worked at the AAAS for a little bit. I did like some consulting. But when I kind of first got my actual job at City College, I actually was like, what do I know about building a master's program? Nothing. But what I started to realize was like, oh, I know what it's like to be a grad student. So I also know what it's like to potentially try to create and organize a program that best supports that. So I think that there is an unfortunate reality that for some jobs, just to get your foot in the door and even be considered, you will have to have a PhD, but you might be surprised by the actual skills and tools that you use in your job. That both come from the training that you got as a PhD, but then also just come from your own lived experiences.
I'd also see change in perception of master degree.
Mm-hmm.
So before there was either with PhD or without PhD. Now a lot of our interns have master's degree, and I can see the difference that they're thinking differently compared to undergrads. Right, so it's not necessarily you need a PhD, but the graduate degree definitely gets people's attention.
Okay. And then, Ashish, just focusing more on starting a company, and I guess for you as well, the PhD, one as, I don't know, raising money, and two as just the fact of like having the experience to start a company. How do you see the PhD?
So you're asking about the difference in the experience of starting a company?
I guess, did you feel your PhD helped you start?
Oh yeah, in my case, definitely. Definitely one of the pivotal moments of my career was my PhD. The work was, I learned a lot. I had a wonderful advisor, and knowledge I gained there is absolutely essential to my startup. Right, so I actually didn't start the company for many, many years after I finished my PhD, and my PhD advisor is not involved in my startup. But morally, I kind of consider my startup to be a spin out of his lab, because intellectually, the core of our innovation is really from what I learned from him. So for me, it was essential.
But also another aspect, when you are a PhD student, or when you do a PhD research, you develop independence in leading this research. You create an idea, or you generate how you're going to test this idea. You generate this process in your head. You analyze the data. You interpret it. You develop step forward, and all of these things are important for you if you're going to start a company. I think troubleshooting and managing projects It's essential.
And also, I think maybe like being comfortable with like ambiguity and also things just not working.
Yeah.
'Cause, experiments most of the time don't work, but then you figure it out. And so I think that is also something that I've seen is, PhD or people who've gone through grad school, they tend to be a little, well, generalizations, but they tend to be a little bit more comfortable with the unknown, like both knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know.
So, at what point did you first think of starting a company? Was that like always in the cards for you, or was it something that came last minute?
No, actually, it happened at one moment when I said, okay, I want to do this. Not that I can do it, but I want to do it. When I was working at Crohn's and Colitis Foundation right after my postdoc, and I said, I told my mother, I said, I miss the science. I miss the creative process in science. And then I told one of my friends, I said, I feel like I'm being productive and impactful, but I feel like I'm not being a scientist. I'm more of a, I don't know, too much paperwork. I'm just doing too much paperwork. And she said, you will always be a scientist. What do you mean? I'm like, oh, no. I can be a scientist if I want. So I thought to myself, okay, I already was speaking with some people that started companies and coming to the event here at BioLabs and other places just to kind of get the idea of who are these people that have their companies. And I said, I think I can do it. And then from the moment I started the company until I actually did some experiments or someone else did experiments in the company, I think it was 2 years because, from the excitement, I have an idea for, a product. And then, I have to incorporate. Then it's like dust falling on me. But this idea that I'm a scientist, I will always be a scientist, and I want it to be this way. So that's what made me start the company.
For me, I think if I think back, I think always had some interest in starting a company. Even as far back as my undergraduate days, I vaguely recall feeling some interest in it, but I never pursued it. I always wanted to have some mastery over something and have something to build. I think there's some founders who need to be founders, that is their desire. They want to start a company. That wasn't fundamentally what I wanted. What I wanted to do was solve some important problem, and until I knew what that problem was and how I might solve it, I didn't care to start a company. So eventually it was my work experience where I worked in bioinformatics and day-to-day understood the pain of the industry and knew how my computer science background could solve that pain, that eventually I was like, okay, now I get it. There's a purpose to what company I would start. And then I decided to start.
It's probably always a little bit of personal story behind what problem you're trying to solve, right?
Natasha, how do you balance having complete control in having your company, but then being one of thousands or tens of thousands of employees at BMS? And is it a somewhat of a disconnect where you could be at BMS and realize you don't get to make, you have layers above you making decisions?
So I think that before people work in biopharma, they think it's like a big machine, all the wheels are spinning together. It's not like that. There is a degree of freedom. Let's say you get to do 75% of what the company wants you to do, and you get 25% of doing what you want to do. You have a great idea, fantastic. Then there has to be always an effort not to mix things in terms of science, because there's a conflict of interest, right? If you take something you learned in one company into another company, it can be a conflict of interest. So it's very important to be transparent. You want to start your own company and while you're working in another scientific organization. Honesty, transparency, disclosure is very important. So everyone knows who is doing what, And even when I talk to my supervisor, he sometimes says, "Well, if I'm just gonna say it, but don't take it to the other company. Just keep it here. This is the idea. This is important." And in my head, I have a separation. Like I don't go even in my head into the direction of what I'm doing in another company. So it's not difficult actually. I find it easy. If you do it, if you're just being relaxed, transparent, honest, it's fine.
So Bria, you've had so many different experiences, and you're working in academia, working in a startup company, and now working with a number of companies. How do you see the different types of work and the different types of job, and what skills do you see are more important at each, and what types of people do you think thrive in the different environments?
Yeah, these are all such good questions and ones I still think about, like, how did we get here? And it wasn't obviously by accident. I don't want to think like I just, it didn't just happen. But I do think that each job that I had really has led me to kind of be productive or have a skill set, have a well-rounded toolbox or skill set that allows me to kind of like move through different aspects of science. I mean, like I said, when I was in grad school, well, a few things happened, or to keep in mind, I should say. When I was in grad school, the master's program that I helped build didn't exist. So that job didn't exist. So I couldn't even think that's the job I'm going to have. When I was in, when I was building the master's program, Indie Bio had not even come to New York. So the chief scientific officer job also didn't exist yet, So I think for me, at each role that I've had, I've always thought, well, what am I learning here, right? What new skills can I learn? And how can those skills then be applied wherever else I go, if they can be? I mean, I think that one of the things that I've always used is kind of my own internal barometer of like what is interesting to me in that moment. I think that it can be really hard to build a career. And I also think it can be really hard to know what you want to do. And so I think that, like I said, for a lot of the decisions that I was making, I just said, well, where am I at in my life right now? What do I want to be doing? What is this opportunity offering me? And is it an opportunity where I can stretch myself, both intellectually, both professionally? And at each step along the way, there was also obviously a little bit of, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, why are these people offering me a job? And I think that's good, because I think then that shows there is room for growth. And one of the reasons why I sort of say like, okay, I wanted to kind of tell my narrative a little bit backwards, because it feels like when I do it that way, like it makes sense. You're like, oh yeah, like you work with a bunch of startups, but before you were only with one startup. And then before that you were training people about how to do this. And you're like, oh, like it all builds on each other. Mm-hmm. But truly, I couldn't see like that narrative when I was actually in each of these jobs, which I think is an okay thing. Again, like I was saying, there's ambiguity about next steps and things like that. But I think the skills that are helpful or that were helpful for me at each one of these jobs was this interest in learning, and also saying like, I know what I'm bringing to the table, but I also know what I don't bring to the table, and I'm willing to learn those things. And so I think a huge thing that is such a valuable skill to develop is saying like, I'm not sure how to do that, but I will figure it out, and I will like talk to the people who do know how to do it. And also, just kind of being willing to do a little bit of research, try, like experiment. I feel like one of the things that I know I sort of already said this, but kind of like outside of the lab, being willing to just even do experiments in your everyday life and say like, okay, this is like, in academia, they call it a pilot. right? Like everything's a pilot program when you do something academia. Because then if it doesn't work, everyone's like, oh, well, that was just a pilot program. Or they'll just be like, oh, we learned some stuff, but we'll figure it out later. So that's the other thing, right? It's being willing to take some calculated risk, learn from those risks, and then make decisions based on that too.
So a dual question for each of you. What's the best piece of advice you've gotten for your career? And what advice do you wish you had gotten but didn't? Who wants to start?
I should go last.
Yeah, I think that I can go first. I think we already said it a few times that if you want to do something for life, you really want to do something you like, right? So I'm a career builder, right? So not everybody. Some people like quality of life more than they like their career, and that's totally fine. In science, it happens less frequently than in maybe other professions where you just like your job, but then 5 o'clock you go home and that's it. Science is always with you. I read constantly and things like that. So I feel like I made the right choice. But in the beginning, it wasn't a choice. It was a default path where you take math test, and if you score well, you can do science and humanities and something else. If you score really, really well, you can be a lawyer, a doctor, a scientist, a humanities, something, and something else. And I said, okay, I scored the best I could, and science, fell on my plate. And I'm like, okay, I'll try it. So I got lucky. Maybe I didn't like it, but so to my children, I would give them advice that they really should do what they like, not what they can because they scored nice, scored well in math tests or other tests. But really try. Internships are amazing. Do as many internships as you can in the pharma companies, in foundations, in nonprofit organizations. I think it's such a valuable experience in consulting companies. You may find it your calling, right, through these 3 weeks, 10 weeks, or 6 months. And I think it would be nice for me to do that. But I'm, as I say, really happy where I am right now. But I think I get lucky. For advice, try different things.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if this is the best advice for professional stuff, but advice that I often think about is advice that my parents have given me, which is from my dad. Similar to what you were saying is, you don't know what you won't like until you do it. And so it's not that you won't know, but I just feel like, especially when it comes to jobs. And so if you have the opportunity to try something, whether that's through an internship, whether that's through a fellowship, try it. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. And you learn something, right? So I think that, so as part of the master's program I was building, I was also an advisor to the students in the program. And so a lot of the students would come in and they would say, oh, I don't know what to do, and I have this opportunity, and what if I don't like it? And I would always be like, well, what if you don't? Great, you've learned something about yourself. And so I know it's not easy to get a job and then stay at it for a little bit and realize you don't like it, but I do think those are you're learning stuff about yourself, and it's all just information that you can then use to make different decisions on. And then my mom, I remember when I traveled abroad when I was in college, and my mom was like, this was insane. And so before I left, she was just like, Sabria, if you're ever in a situation and it doesn't feel right, trust your gut instinct. And I think she was just sort of saying that as a mom, and I was traveling. But I think a lot about that, about strengthening what you know about yourself, and your own gut instinct, and knowing when a situation isn't working for you, or when you are in meetings and like maybe your voice isn't being heard, being able to speak up if you can. So I think that's some of the, like I said, I'm not sure if it's like the best, but it is advice I think a lot about. But I think advice that I'm sure people told me and I didn't realize at the time, especially as I was kind of thinking about next career steps, is like you can change your mind, right? Like I knew I wanted to be in science from a very early age, but I just also didn't know what that meant. And so after a while, I thought it meant I needed to be a doctor. That's all I saw. My mom was a physician assistant. Everyone I knew was going to medical school, and I was like, yes, this makes sense. And obviously, I didn't end up going to medical school because I changed my mind, but it took a really long time for me to come to terms with that, because I was like, oh, I'm letting so many people down because I once said I really wanted to be a doctor. But I think that was something that has taken me some time to really fully understand, is that you are absolutely it's your life. You can change your mind. If after a while of being in science, or you're starting companies, or working in companies, you're just like, yeah, I want to try something else. Even if you have the opportunity to do that, I think you should.
So I thought I should go last because my answer is a bit cynical. I think I've gotten so much good advice, which makes it not useful. Okay, so everything always sounds good. People tell you to work hard, you should. People also tell you to have work-life balance, it also sounds correct. People tell you to try different things, that sounds correct, right? Can't argue that. I'll tell you the opposite. You should really stay focused and follow through with your commitments. That also sounds correct, right? So I kind of feel like all the advice I've ever gotten is good, and thus it's not always that helpful, right? So I think the trick, and I really like Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. He starts out, the preface of the book says, I can't tell you anything, okay? I'm not going to help you. Nothing I know is useful to you. Your life is yours. He's talking about founders. He's saying you decided to be a founder. Now you're in trouble. It's your problem, right? And then he proceeds to tell you 200 pages of things that are actually kind of useful, right? So I think I would say, have a coach or a mentor. I think that's something I wish I had more of in my life. All your problems are hard and they're specific to your context and your situation, and all the generic advice may or may not apply or needs some variation of it. It's harder than that. You really need somebody to talk through it with in depth and in detail and really figure out continuously, all the time, what you should do. And I don't think we have that much. There's professional coaches. You can't necessarily go hire one. It's not really feasible.
So do you have a professional coach or a mentor right now?
I do not, and it's really something I feel deeply is missing.
Yeah.
I have
You do?
not coached mentors that I'm mentoring.
And who are they? You don't have to give names, but just general.
Some scientists that switch to consulting and help other companies raise funding or stay focused. Some that previous founders that they retired, they already went through this journey, and they, keep my motivation going and say, that's okay, this is normal, keep going. Some people that have more experience in business development, which I can ask a question, which is knowledge that I don't have. I didn't study, right? So what is this? What is this term? What is that? So I have one like that. So yeah, that's 3 types of mentors that I have.
Sabria, mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have people I can go to, and these are mentors are different than friends. You have your group chat, or I have group chats where I'm when work stuff is going bad. But I think, for example, even when I decided to leave City College and go to this startup, I reached out to people and I said, I'm professional, people who are in my professional network. And I said, I'm nervous about this. Is this the right thing? Here's why I think, and sometimes mentors are also people who just kind of let you talk about where your fears and anxieties are, and not to, coddle you or anything like that, but to just say, well, like, what are the pros and cons here? Like, let's walk through different scenarios. And so, yeah, I do have, I'm more on Ashisha's side, where I wish I'd probably connected with them more often, which, like, I feel like now this reminds me I should follow up with some of them. But yeah, I at least in that moment, I definitely was like, okay, here are like the 3 or 4 people I'm going to call on just to see, again, because this felt like a big professional decision. And I wanted to make sure that I had all the information to make the best decision possible.
I think it's good that you're both mentioning multiple. Like you really need many. Like one will help you in one way. You need like 5, 10, the more's better.
10. You can find time for 10.
Well, that's also an issue, right? Which is one of the reasons I don't have it. It's actually hard work, right? It's like, but
communicate. Yeah, you have to prepare for the meeting. You have to show them something. You have to, value their
and there's
time.
always something else that seems more urgent and more important. So.
And Rich, you brought a valid point that it has to be an honest mentor. That they're not gonna just say, "Oh, it's okay," but they're actually gonna give you valid advice. And one time we had a meeting with investors, and they asked me so many questions by the end of the meeting. Like when the meeting was finished, I was crying. And so I called my mentor. She was part of the meeting. And I said, "Oh my God, they were so aggressive." She goes, "Me, toughen up." That's it. That's her advice. Toughen up. This is normal. I'm like, okay.
But I think to Shisha's point earlier about, all of you will get advice from so many people. And then it is also really up to you to say, okay, well, like, who do I trust who's given me all of this advice? Who really truly understands the context with which I'm, asking this advice, my lived experience, because advice obviously runs the gamut, and you could get people that would say, "Oh, quit your job, pursue a startup," and it's like, okay, but I need health insurance. I need potentially to support a family. I might need to support my mom and dad, and so that advice is like also not realistic. And so again, it's just really understanding who can you build relationships with, honest relationships with, and then who's going to give you honest feedback. And then again, it's kind of like strengthening this internal barometer. You know yourself the best. Well, as you grow, but anyway, like then you'll know, like, oh, this is good advice for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some of my best advisors, it never sounds like they're advising. Like we have an advisor right now. His name is Todd Peterson, my lead investor. Whenever I talk to them, it rarely ever sounds like they're giving me any advice. It's only later I realize that they directed me, and it's because they spend so much time listening and understanding what I actually need, and then they suggest something concrete. So it doesn't feel like advice. It's just they like solve the problem for me, right? That's the best.
Sometimes asking the right questions is a better impact on discussion than telling something.
So we could go all night. You guys are great. And we've been going for a while, and there's still more pizza. But does anyone have questions? Now's your chance. So I think Margot had her hand up. So, Rosette, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, any of you guys can answer this. Like when you graduate right out of a PhD, I hear a lot of people saying that they're struggling to like figure out what kind of jobs they want to apply to. Yeah, I don't know if you went through that struggle, and if you did, like how did you decide? And let's say after you take that job, and then Sabria, I know that you went to different other jobs. How did you also decide to which jobs to apply to? Like what did you have in mind?
So I don't know if my trajectory after grad school was the best one, because I didn't apply for any jobs when I was in grad school. And I think that's bad. I think you should definitely start looking while you're in your, at the beginning of whatever last year you think it will be. Just start putting feelers out there, start getting your resume together, just start asking people, it might be that you need to remove noise from, go sit in a room or go outside and really say to yourself, okay, now that I have this degree, what do I want to be doing with it? do I even want to be using this degree as part of my next job? So like I was doing all of that, but not then actually making any actionable moves. So after I graduated, like I said, I just needed a job. And at the time, one of the program managers at BioBus was going on paternity leave. And so I knew people who worked in the BioBus ecosystem, and they said, hey, we need someone for a few months. And I just said yes. One, because I really loved the BioBus mission. I knew people working there, and I was like, okay, well, this will get me through the next 3 months. So what I ended up doing in that time was going to kind of a lot of workshops and conferences about, or specifically dedicated to kind of increasing women in STEM, which is where I met the Dean of Engineering at the time for the City College of New York. And I just went up to her and I was like, hey, you were on a panel and your story really resonated with me. Can we keep in touch? I would love to just talk to you about what I'm thinking about my next steps. And so even though it did take us some time to kind of get that meeting scheduled, when I had that meeting, she had said to me, it is possible that we are going to get this funding to start a new program, and I think you would be a good addition to help run it. And again, I was like, what? No. But I also was like, I need a job. So again, these are, I think I took some jobs for obviously very practical reasons, but also because that opportunity presented itself. And because, I kind of put myself out there in some ways. And so that has sort of happened for kind of each of the subsequent jobs that I've had, which, I'm happy to share a little bit more about later. But I think for me, it really was a combination of like needing a job, needing to pay my rent, and then also saying like, here's what I'm capable of doing, and here's what I'm interested in. And the kind of the right person hearing that and saying like, oh, I think I might have an opportunity for you.
I think the first job is the most difficult to get.
Mm-hmm.
I did work as a research assistant before PhD, but it was still in the academic environment. So it's not like I had expanded network of people that could make the introduction. And I literally applied for 100 jobs. Maybe I had accent, maybe I was saying something wrong. I applied to industry jobs, academic jobs, project management jobs, nothing. Maybe we had too many people that graduated at the same time. I don't know. But eventually, one of the people so what I did, I started talking about me looking for a job with anybody I know. And so one of the people that I do karate with, she said, we have a 3-month project. Why don't you come and work for us?
3 months.
3 months.
The perfect
And
month.
then turned into 3 years. It turned into 3 years. It doubled my salary from what I earned before. I'm like, great. It had good hours. I had 2 little children. Fantastic. So what Sabria is saying is important to kind of consider everything in your life. I needed money. I needed the job. And I liked the job. I eventually, I learned a lot in that, but it was super, super hard to get through those jobs.
And one thing that I do want to commend you for, because I know it's very hard, and this is something that I also was telling some of the students that I mentor, is no one can read your mind. So you, sometimes as uncomfortable as it can be, do need to talk about what you want to be doing out loud to other people. And because you never know who is going to hear that and who is then going to say, oh, wait, actually, even if in the moment they're like, oh, that's interesting, thank you. A week later, something might come by their desk and they say, oh, I just had a conversation with someone who would be a good fit for that. So as comfortable as you can get, really start, right? And I think the first thing, it does start with you knowing, well, what do I want to do? Because then, you can start telling it to other people. But then, especially in New York City, you just sort of never know where opportunities will
I think I've done job searches 2 ways. When I was searching for my postdoc, I was brand new to biology, so I was switching to a completely new field. So, and my advisor was not a biologist, so it was very much cold calling, right? So I sent out 65 applications, just doing Google searches for bioinformatics labs. So I think in that case, it was like persistence, right? I had made this decision to get into bioinformatics, except I didn't even know what DNA was, like right? So somehow I was going to do it, and persistence was the strategy. I got 2 offers from Yale, right? And like it works, right? But it was a focused outreach, right? It's not. I didn't just send resumes. Like for each and every single one of the 65 applications, like I read about the PI's lab, I understood what they were doing. Crafted a personal email saying like how I think I could contribute, right? And even then, out of those 65, it got a response from like 10, 8, like 7 who said no thanks, right? But I only needed 1 offer, so I got 2. It was great, done, right? My job search at NYU was the opposite. By then, I was like pretty experienced in the field. I didn't do a search. I just called the one. I knew I needed to move to New York because my wife was here. I was looking for a job in New York. I needed 1 person. I liked her. I called her. I said, "You know me. I'm good." She had a job. That was it, right? So So I think that's my experience. I think one thing I'm seeing in candidates who are interviewing often is lack of persistence. I've interviewed several people who I'm quite confident they really, really want to work for us. We have a kind of a unique type of software development we do. There's not that many companies that do it the way we do it. If you're into that kind of software development, this is like one of the only few jobs that you can get in the world, right?
So I even want to work for you.
What are they but I've had candidates who like, and that person's friend told me this person is really interested, right? And I had the interview, and they just didn't sound excited. They were just not excited. And then we had the interview, and they didn't email me afterwards saying, "Thank you, I really want the job." So guess what? I haven't made them an offer, right? Like, you have to show me you want the job, right?
Great.
So,
right there, yeah.
So, right? So otherwise, I'm not sure, right? That's the problem. It's like, you might be great, but maybe you don't want the job. I don't know either. So you have to just tell us if you're really interested, right?
Where you go?
Thank you. It's really very valuable information. I'm going to be in my 5th year of PhD, so it's great. I have a very different question. I'm looking at startup companies now, and I feel like most startup companies are very much based on a product. But I guess I'm wondering if it's possible and how to start a company based on an idea as opposed to a product. Because you can't make a lab in your kitchen, but what is the first step, I guess, to sort of initiating that idea?
Does the idea lead to a project? Will it lead to a project eventually? Yeah. So that's great. I mean, there's Y Combinator. Y Combinator, which is an accelerator. You can start with an idea. So what they do is basically throughout their program, they develop this idea into a product. They can do market research with you. You do that, and I'm just reading one of the books right now, and they say, okay, if you ask right now, is it important to have a co-founder? And I mean, not essential, but very few companies succeeded without. So when I started the company, it was very hard. So I invited someone to be a partner last year because it was just too hard by yourself. So I would suggest see someone who has other qualities that you don't have. You're a business person or technology, informatics. So something that will make your idea become a reality, and then go into one of the programs. Is Western. I don't know if you need money to be part of IndieBio. I don't know.
So the model that we work on off of is we actually give companies money in exchange for a little bit of equity, and we help them do scientific due diligence, strengthen their business model. We give them access to labs. But I would even say, before that, one of the ways in which we assess companies is, okay, you have an idea, but so what? I mean, I'm not saying that about you personally. I'm sure every single person in this room could come up with an idea. But I think for us, especially because we are I mean, we're different than Y Combinator in many ways, but one of the primary ways is because we specifically focus on developing life science, biotech, and deep tech companies. Is what problem is your idea solving? And is it a real problem? And I don't mean that in like it's a real problem for me and 10 of people that I know. Like, do you actually know this technology or this idea that you have is making, or could, if it's, out in the world in the way that you want it to be, making some sort of meaningful impact? And I think what I've been seeing, and again, I've only been in this particular role for about 3 or 4 months, is a lot of times when technologies come out of academic institutions, is like they're very good scientifically, right? You've got the papers, you've got the technology, you maybe have like a mechanism of action, but often it might not scale in such a way that, it's, oh, this technology is going to cure cancer. Like, is it? Or like, does it just address a very small thing? And who is it really, So I think for me, and we do accept companies with ideas backed by solid research and science and, in vitro data and things like that, but we really want to see the vision, right? We really want to see, does this technology make sense? Who is going to pay for it? Is there a team? And so I do think, to me, the first step would be really kind of asking those kinds of questions, right? Like, what is this idea? What is the problem that I'm actually solving for? And does the idea or technology that I'm developing like actually solve that problem?
So you should just call like other founders. There's lots of programs that can help you. The situation you're describing is the normal one, right? It's the ideation phase of a startup. There's books on it. There's methods for like developing it further, and there's programs like NSF iCore, which maybe is right for you. I went through the eLab program in New York City, which was great and kind of just forced you to think through this. And there's kind of well-defined stages of like where you want to get to, like when are you ready to raise? What does it require before you raise? Are you ready to quit your day job yet or not? Like, all of those kinds of questions have been thought through by many, many people. So,
Actually,
I was just going to some other programs too you could look into. Like, I know you said eLab, but there's iCourse. There's lots of programs you could take as a grad student too to really assess both the scientific feasibility of your technology, but also like the business feasibility of your project. So I know you said eLabs, there's iCore. I know there's a new one that just started called Nucleate that also specifically works with grad students around helping them develop their ideas, because IndieBio is, we say we often are the first institutional check in a lot of companies, and so we do fund early stage companies, but we do need to see something, and it's not even necessarily a prototype. I mean, it's great if you have one.
I mean, everything Sabrina just asked you to do is a lot more. So there's other programs that will facilitate you doing that work, so then you can apply it. So,
and then have the answers to those questions already.
I can give you information of one program I just finished. It's completely free. It's called Westchester County. It's the Biotech Accelerator. So they can help you prepare a package that then you can show them and say, here's how it's going to look when we develop it as a product.
Which is run by Mary Howard, which is the same person that ran the eLab.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
And all these kind of preliminary programs, I would say, what's really great about them is some of them are free, some of them are only, let's say, 10 weeks or 2 months. But I think what all of them help you do is really get to a point where you say, okay, this is a real thing. You do the due diligence, you do some customer discovery, because like I said, ideas are, we all have ideas. So kind of just like focusing on some of those specifics of like, does it work? Does it scale? What's my business model?
Yeah. And what university are you at?
Oh, I'm at NYU Lango.
Okay, so they have a program, right?
Yeah,
right. This is like very.
Yeah. So you should totally just join that. They have the pitch competition. And that's it.
This has been fabulous. No, as I say, we could talk all night, but want to be respectful to your time. But thank you so much. It's been great. What's that?
I was like, went by so quickly.
I know.
I was like, who has more questions?
Thank you. This is fabulous. I'm going to turn the recording off, and to the extent that you have time, if people have other questions, if you want to hang around and answer them, that would be great. There's still more pizza. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Thank you.
Inviting us.